This will be the disclaimer portion, so just buckle up while we get right through this, and then I will introduce Jesse. So our UNIGHT virtual forum is educational and supportive in nature and will offer self-care strategies to help you in your daily life. However, the group will not engage in rendering any psychological or healthcare advice for any particular individual or situation, and will not provide medical, mental health, or any other type of health-related service. No diagnosis, treatment recommendations, medication or advice, or any other type of medical or mental health recommendations will be offered. Our support group is not a substitute for or alternative to treatment by a licensed medical professional. Always seek the advice of your own physician or another qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding your medical condition. The Hypersomnia Foundation does not recommend or endorse any specific test, physicians, lawyers, legal advisors, products, medications, procedures, opinions, or any other information that may be referenced on its website or during any online support groups. So I made that through that, so I will probably stutter through the next part. So it is truly my honor to introduce Dr. Cook. Hereafter, we're just going to say Jesse, because that's just the type of guy he is. Jesse is a postdoctoral fellow at the School of Medicine of Public Health, Department of Psychiatry at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He received his doctoral degree in clinical psychology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and completed his pre-doctoral internship at the VA Palo Alto healthcare system. His scientist practitioner training and skill set centers on the intersection of sleep and mental health. With this primary program of research proposed the classification, assessment, and treatment of idiopathic hypersomnolence disorder. Additionally, he has produced a body of research related to the strengths, limitations, and overall utility of wearable sleep tracking technology for research and clinical purposes. He recently served as a co-author for the inaugural State of the Science and Recommendations for Using Wearable Technology in Sleep and Circadian Research. Clinically, he embraces an integrative orientation, drawing principally from CBT and third wave approaches, ACT, DBT, for example. He is very passionate about behavioral sleep medicine and intends to specialize as a diplomat in behavioral sleep medicine. So that is what the words say about Jesse, but I'm just here to tell you that Jesse is truly one of my best friends. We talk multiple times throughout the week, sometimes every day, multiple times per day. He is not only a good personal friend, he has also been an incredible ambassador of sleep health and also hypersomnolence disorders as well. And he's just been a great champion of advocate authors and the power of lived experience. I can give you multiple examples of times I've reached out to him that he's just been tremendous at echoing back maybe what I was saying. He's also not afraid to pick my brain and to see if maybe he's on the right path, or if perhaps there's some nice conversation we can have that advances our understanding. He's a phenomenal human being, and I'm blessed to have him as a friend. So without getting more mushy, I'm going to pass it over to Jesse. Thanks, bud.
Thank you, Matt, for without a doubt the warmest introduction I've ever had. Actually, I had you muted the entire time because I figured I'd break out into tears if I actually listened to you. But yeah, I really appreciate that introduction, and I honestly made the longest bio I could possible to make you stumble through everything. But I appreciate it. I'm gonna try and share my slides.
Voila.
Look at that. All right. So yeah, I'm Jesse Cook, speaker for tonight's presentation entitled Actigraphy and Central Disorders of Hypersomnolence, Wearables and Sleep Tracking. It's an absolute pleasure to be invited for this presentation. Really want to thank the Hypersomnia Foundation, and Matt's pretty cool too. This presentation's largely purposed as an orientation to today's topic, and it's structured to set a foundation for a deeper discussion that includes all of you. And ultimately, I wanted to prioritize time for that discussion and the ability to answer questions. So I'm hopeful to land this somewhere between 25 and 30 minutes. I tried to kind of vary the breadth and depth of the material to kind of cater to a wide audience. So I apologize if some of it is a bit too science heavy at times, but I tried to give the full array here. I think it's important to figure out who I am, though. So we'll kick this off to just take a quick moment to further introduce myself and kind of share about this journey to this point in my career of science and practice, grounded in sleep and mental health. And My sleep journey actually began, and generally my experience with actigraphy, at the University of Arizona as a research assistant in the late Dr. Richard Bootson's Sleep Research Laboratory. And for those unfamiliar, Dr. Bootson was a pioneer of behavioral treatments for insomnia. And so I didn't really know it at the time, but I was really blessed with this unique opportunity. And I then decided it was a good idea to move from the desert to the frozen tundra, where I established more familiarity with actigraphy and wearables while working as a research specialist in Dr. David Plant's Sleep Research Laboratory at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And it turns out that I actually really love Madison and the mentoring that Dr. Plant provides. So I ended up completing my clinical psychology PhD through UW. I also want to underscore Dr. Plant's important role in shaping my understanding of central disorders of hypersomnolence, as he is a psychiatrist, board certified in sleep medicine, and a leading expert on these conditions. And additionally, during that period, I was fortunate to have 3 years of rich behavioral sleep medicine training in the behavioral sleep clinic at the Madison VA, which included the opportunity to work directly with clients living with CDH. And I also just recently completed my clinical internship at the Palo Alto VA, closing the book on the clinical psychology PhD. Now, as you already know, but I returned to Madison because I absolutely love Madison, and I've been blessed with the opportunity to have this postdoctoral fellow position that is a split clinical and research appointmentship grounded in behavioral sleep medicine. And over the past 10 years or so, I've built a primary research program centering on advancing the clinical care for unexplained hypersomnolence, a phenotype classified as either idiopathic hypersomnia or hypersomnolence disorder, depending on the nosology. Within this research program, I grew really interested in enhancing habitual sleep measurement to improve clinical assessment and treatment response monitoring, which fundamentally drove a secondary program related to the utility and limitations of wearable sleep tracking technology. These are a selection of published investigations and reviews from that secondary program of research, and you'll notice that many of these publications are specific to central disorders of hypersomnolence. Ultimately, this biography is purposed to establish kind of a foundational trust that I'm coming at this topic from both a scientist and practitioner perspective, with expertise in the area, experiencing the evolution of wearable technology over the last decade, and having a unique lens into their application within CDH. I've also had the privilege of formulating an extremely meaningful friendship with Matt, who's such an important and invaluable resource for the progression of science and practice related to CDH and beyond. He's also a giant goofball with a massive heart filled with abundant compassion. And I'd like the record to stand that he can outlive Dr. Chris Winters. I'm glad that's recorded. All right, now to recenter on our topic of focus for today's discussion, I'd like to begin with an introduction to the diagnostic umbrella category called central disorders of hypersomnolence, even though this is probably familiar to many of you. Central disorders of hypersomnolence, or CDH, is a group of disorders in the International Classification of Sleep Disorders that share the cardinal complaint of excessive daytime sleepiness. And this excessive daytime sleepiness is not caused by another sleep disorder, such as in cases where untreated sleep apnea is primarily causing excessive daytime sleepiness. Additionally, CDH classification applies when clients also display adequate and regular sleep habits and characteristics, more or less attempting to rule out other potential causes of the presenting daytime sleepiness. Within this umbrella category called central disorders of hypersomnolence, there are 3 main disorders that will be a focus in today's discussion. In the ICSD-3-TR, there are 2 types of narcolepsy, type 1 and type 2, with the presence of cataplexy being the principal distinguishing symptom between these 2 types of narcolepsy. Additionally, there is a disorder referred to as idiopathic hypersomnia, which captures the experience of hypersomnolence without an underlying explanation. We'll talk more about features and characteristics of these disorders over the coming slides. For now, I just want to prime the audience that acronyms such as NT1, NT2, and IH may appear across the presentation, with these referencing narcolepsy type 1, narcolepsy type 2, and idiopathic hypersomnia, respectively. This schematic presents some key overlapping and distinct symptoms between the 3 main central disorders of hypersomnolence, narcolepsy type 1, narcolepsy type 2, and idiopathic hypersomnia, as well as the less common Klein-Levin syndrome, or KLS. As you can see, all the disorders share the symptom of excessive daytime sleepiness, yet there are also some key distinguishing features, such as cataplexy as a feature to distinguish narcolepsy type 1 and type 2, as well as sleep paralysis and fragmented sleep to distinguish narcolepsy from idiopathic hypersomnia. I really like this schematic showing overlapping and distinct symptoms between the three main central disorders of hypersomnolence. And I'm largely using these figures to introduce some key characteristics and behaviors that we will be focusing on across this presentation, such as sleep duration, sleep continuity, a term reflecting the degree of fragmentation or disruption in one's sleep, daytime napping behavior, and daytime sleep propensity, a term reflecting one's ability to fall asleep during the day. I really don't want to make this presentation all about the classification and the diagnostic criteria of these three disorders, yet it is essential to point out some objectively measurable key nighttime and daytime sleep characteristics within the diagnostic criteria. Sleep duration is a key criterion when assessing for IH. The demonstration of prolonged sleep duration, which is defined as greater than or equal to 660 minutes across 24-hour objective monitoring, is a sufficient but not necessary criterion for idiopathic hypersomnia. This means that it's not necessary for the diagnosis of IH, with some people experiencing IH not meeting this criteria. Daytime sleep propensity, or one's ability to fall asleep during the daytime, is a core diagnostic feature for all three disorders. This is objectively captured by the multiple sleep latency test, which we'll discuss in more detail on the next slide. With a mean sleep latency of less than or equal to 8 minutes, a necessary criterion for both NT1 and NT2, meaning that a person must display this to meet diagnostic criteria for NT1 and NT2. Now, in idiopathic hypersomnia, this criterion is sufficient but not necessary, mirroring the dynamic of prolonged sleep duration. Lastly, the demonstration of sleep onset rapid eye movement sleep, or SOREMS, is an important distinguishing feature between narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia. A SOREM is an abnormally quick transition into REM sleep after sleep initiation, with the threshold of less than or equal to 15 minutes used to define a SOREM. Displaying two or more SOREMs across the PSG and MSLT assessment, which we'll talk about more on the next slide, is a necessary diagnostic criterion for both NT1 and NT2, while being exclusionary for the diagnosis of IH. So on the last slide, I presented some key diagnostic, objectively measurable sleep characteristics. On this slide, I want to walk through the gold standard assessment process that affords measurement of these characteristics.
I see your name on the screen.
An important but sometimes underappreciated component of this assessment protocol is the evaluation of habitual sleep prior to in-laboratory assessment. This is important to rule out other potential causes of excessive daytime sleepiness, such as insufficient sleep duration or circadian rhythm sleep-wake disorders, as well as capture key information about sleep-wake timing to inform the scheduling of the PSG and MSLT. Additionally, inadequate sleep in the days preceding in-laboratory assessment has the potential to bias key outcomes, such as the timing of rapid eye movement sleep on the PSG and across the MSLT. After that initial monitoring, clients undergo an in-laboratory PSG that should be tailored as best as possible to the individual's habitual sleep and wake timing. Sleep centers vary in their ability to meet this need due to a multitude of factors. Similarly, centers vary in their ability to provide ad libitum PSG, where assessment duration is not capped at a specific amount. Ad libitum protocols can be a major logistical challenge for centers, but are necessary to afford demonstration of prolonged sleep duration, as well as achieve sleep of sufficient duration prior to MSLT. After the termination of PSG, clients undergo a daytime multiple sleep latency test, which is a nap-based protocol that assesses for daytime sleep propensity and the presence of abnormal REM sleep. Although traditionally structured as a 5-nap protocol, 4-nap protocols are common due to logistical reasons, with research suggesting that 4-nap protocols are generally sufficient for maintaining diagnostic accuracy. So, although the current gold standard approach to diagnostic assessment for CDH provides some really critically important information to support accurate diagnosis of CDH, there are some notable shortcomings. Fundamentally, the protocol is time-intensive, resource-demanding, and logistically challenging, with protocols commonly varying across centers. Additionally, there are known concerns about the MSLT, particularly related to the test-retest reliability when conducted outside of narcolepsy type 1. And the PSG and MSLT portions of the protocol are conducted in an artificial environment, which has the potential to influence the sleepability and other characteristics of the person undergoing assessment. And lastly, the many hoops and hurdles of the protocol, including financial cost, limit the ability for repeat and follow-up assessments, leaving clinicians reliant on a single time point snapshot for diagnostic decisions, while also rarely being used to assess for changes in response to treatment. All right, thank you for moving through that with me. Let's turn our attention to actigraphy, which is the application of accelerometry to estimate sleep and wake. Great. So what is accelerometry? More or less, the measurement of changes in motion over time. Though accelerometry can be captured at various points across the body, wrist-worn devices applied on the non-dominant wrist are primarily utilized in sleep medicine. Actigraphy has been used for over 60 years to quantify sleep and has served a long-standing role in sleep research and medicine as a tool to objectively measure longitudinal habitual sleep and wake. On the right side of the screen is an actigram, which visualizes transformed accelerometry data by depicting activity across the day and night. Sleep intervals can be both automatically and manually applied, with scoring algorithms applied to classify periods of time or epochs. With scoring algorithms applied to classify periods of time or epochs as sleep and wake during those intervals. Some actigraphs can additionally collect ambient light information, which can be helpful for identifying overexposure or underexposure to light at various times of day and night, and also circadian phenotyping. Actigraphy can provide some very valuable information for clinical decision-making, such as the average bedtime and rise time of individuals, as well as the variation in sleep scheduling. Additionally, it can quantify estimates of time in bed, total sleep time, and sleep continuity, including variables such as sleep onset latency, or how long it took a person to fall asleep, and wake after sleep onset, or how long someone is awake during the night after they initially fell asleep. This figure can be overwhelming, but I merely want to point to the wide range of potential measures that can be extracted from actigraphy across sleep and wake. The vast majority of these are not readily utilized in sleep medicine yet. There may be utility in exploring uncommon measures as indicators of treatment response, such as those related to activity across the day. Within the diagnostic process for central disorders of hypersomnolence, actigraphy plays an important and perhaps underappreciated role. It is employed to monitor habitual sleep for 7 to 14 days prior to in-laboratory assessment, with collected data utilized to rule out alternative causes of excessive daytime sleepiness, such as insufficient sleep duration and circadian rhythm sleep-wake disorders. Additionally, these habitually collected data are utilized to ensure that an individual has adequate sleep duration preceding the in-laboratory assessment to protect against the potential of biasing key assessment outcomes, such as sleep onset rapid eye movement sleep episodes. And if that isn't important enough for you, it is also recognized as a viable tool for capturing the prolonged sleep duration criterion in idiopathic hypersomnia. Here's the diagnostic criteria for idiopathic hypersomnia, with the bottom indicating that results from actigraphy can be utilized when evaluating the prolonged sleep duration criterion in the absence of positive results from the PSG MSLT or 24-hour PSG monitoring. Despite the long-standing important role, there are some notable shortcomings of actigraphy as well. Inherently, actigraphy is limited to a strict dichotomization classification approach. This means that it only classifies data as sleep or wake, which inhibits any insight into the stage or type of sleep. In the context of CDH assessment, this limits the utility given the inability to provide information on REM sleep. Traditional actigraphs also require specialized software, resulting in the need to return the device to a sleep center for data downloading and interpretation from a trained staff member. As such, there's no ability for real-time feedback or summary information. The reliance on accelerometry also leaves this technology prone to misclassification of motionless wake as sleep, which can lead to overestimations of sleep characteristics, such as sleep duration and efficiency, as well as inaccurate identification of bedtime, rise time, and sleep onset. Actigraphs also have historically shown poor performance at the identification of daytime naps and estimating sleep during daytime naps, with this being most apparent in naps of short duration. Lastly, research has shown that device performance, meaning the accuracy of their estimations, can vary based on individual and sleep characteristics, which highlights the need for research to evaluate performance across different populations and sleep problems. With that in mind, let's take a moment to review some of the science that has used actigraphy in the context of central disorders of hypersomnolence. There really have only been a few studies that have assessed actigraphic performance relative to gold standard PSG in samples of CDH. We'll first start with a study from our laboratory, which evaluated a consumer wearable device, actigraphy and polysomnography, in a sample of patients undergoing clinical assessment for central disorders of hypersomnolence. That purple box on the bottom right captures the main message here that actigraphy overestimated sleep duration and efficiency while underestimating sleep onset latency and wake after sleep onset relative to the gold standard in laboratory polysomnography. Here's another piece of literature from our laboratory attempting to identify the optimal setting configurations for actigraphic estimates of nighttime sleep duration in a sample of individuals with suspected idiopathic hypersomnia. Again, as a reminder, the prolonged sleep duration criterion for idiopathic hypersomnia can be met based on actigraphic collection in lieu of a positive result from the PSG and MSLT or 24-hour continuous PSG monitoring. We analyzed 18 different setting configurations and compared estimates of total sleep time from these configurations against the gold standard polysomnography. And this graph plots the differences between the estimates from actigraphy and polysomnography across the 18 different possible combinations. And the main take home here is that setting configurations matter. As you can see, agreement with polysomnography varied immensely across the different setting configurations. Not only do settings matter, but the scoring algorithms applied on the data affect the actigraphic performance as well. And recent work by Biscarini and colleagues is a clear example of this. This study compared nighttime and daytime sleep estimated by actigraphy against polysomnography in a sample of central disorders of hypersomnolence. They analyzed actigraphy across three different widely utilized scoring approaches and showed variations in estimations between the three scoring approaches. The pink box reflects some of the big take-homes here. On the left of that box, it clearly shows that actigraphy really struggled with accurate estimation of sleep duration during daytime naps, with all algorithms overestimating daytime sleep duration across both idiopathic hypersomnia and narcolepsy. On the right of that box, the variation between algorithms is very apparent, as well as the notable magnitude of variation that can occur. To close the section on actigraphy, I just want to highlight two well-done studies that show the ability of actigraphy collected data to not just differentiate central disorders of hypersomnolence from healthy controls, but also to distinguish between CDH disorders. For example, generally relied upon parameters that capture sleep fragmentation can be highly valuable for distinguishing between narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia. All right, now that the book is closed on actigraphy, let's start a descent by overviewing other wearable sleep tracking technology and their application to central disorders of hypersomnolence. The landscape of consumer sleep tracking technology is extremely expansive, with seemingly an endless supply of devices purporting the ability to measure or track sleep to some degree. An exhaustive review of this topic is far beyond the scope of today's discussion. Rather, I'm going to provide a general overview of what is known about devices today, and then review the limited information on what is known about these devices in CDH. Consumer sleep technology has exploded over the recent decade, which has led to devices becoming a ubiquitous part of society. Devices will vary in their approach to data collection, with three main approaches employed commonly. Accelerometry is the measure of movement or motion, mirroring traditional actigraphy. Photoplethysmography, or PPG, affords a lens into cardiac and respiratory activity. And electroencephalography, or EEG, assesses brain actigraphy. The most common devices are wrist-worn or ring-worn, with the majority of the modern models employing a combination of accelerometry and PPG. EEG is currently only available through headband devices, and the combination of all three is scarce among the existing landscape of consumer sleep tracking technology. A major challenge with consumer technology is the proprietary unknown black box algorithms that compute sleep and wake characteristics. Now, the unknown nature of the proprietary algorithms for consumer sleep tracking technology is a problem on its own. Yet, within that perhaps lies a bigger problem: the potential instability of data due to software updates and algorithm changes. More or less, historical data estimates can change overnight, so to speak. As such, you may see changes in your sleep that are not actually reflective of actual changes, but rather reflective of changes in scoring algorithms over time. The rapidly expanding and evolving landscape of consumer sleep tracking technology creates a seemingly impossible challenge for science when it comes to evaluating the capabilities and shortcomings of devices. I'm someone who loathes speaking in universal statements, but I'm going to outline what is generally known about devices based on scientific evaluation. Yet, I absolutely want to stress that performance between devices from different companies will vary. Additionally, and importantly, performance between different models of the same devices can vary due to differences in hardware and software. Again, why I loathe speaking in universals. The existing literature consistently seems to suggest that modern devices that include both accelerometry and PPG have comparable and at times superior performance for sleep-wake estimation relative to traditional actigraphy. Yet, mirroring a shortcoming to traditional actigraphy, non-EEG devices tend to still be vulnerable to misclassification of motionless wake as sleep. Now, they do extend classification beyond just sleep and wake, with most devices classifying sleep into light, deep, and REM. Historically, device performance was rather poor when it came to classifying sleep, yet the newer algorithms in the most modern common devices are greatly improved over earlier generations. And similar to traditional actigraphy, the ability to identify, quantify, and classify short sleep bouts, such as naps, appears rather limited. However, this is an understudied area that warrants more scientific attention. And importantly, the evaluation of these devices is often performed in convenient samples of young adults absent of sleep complaints. As such, the performance and abilities of consumer sleep tracking technology in sleep and circadian disorder populations is poorly understood. This is a slide that I often use to summarize the general confidence in common metrics available in consumer-grade devices, with some of these also available in traditional actigraphy. It is critical to emphasize that all metrics are vulnerable to misestimations on a night-to-night basis, even those with the most confidence. So it is important to keep a fundamental skepticism for data from a single night, while emphasizing patterns across data over time. Now, when specifically talking about what is known about consumer-grade device performance in central disorders of hypersomnolence, I must be candid and report that we have very limited empirical studies to draw from, with nothing in the newest generation of devices. There have only been 2 previously performed investigations evaluating consumer-grade device performance in samples of CDH, with both conducted by our laboratory. Circling back to a previous investigation I showed you earlier, we also evaluated one of the earliest multi-sensor wrist-worn consumer-grade devices, known as the Jawbone UP3, which I don't think exists anymore. This device significantly overestimated sleep duration and efficiency, while significantly underestimating wake after sleep onset relative to the gold standard polysomnography. And not pictured here, but the investigation also showed relatively poor ability for the device to classify sleep into stages of light, deep, and REM. Additionally, we took a look at the device's ability to detect SOREM episodes during daytime naps relative to PSG-identified SOREMs. Of the 167 naps across MSLT data, the Jawbone UP3 didn't detect any true positives and had 18 false positives. Not great. And to my knowledge, no other study has looked at the ability of consumer-grade devices to detect SOREMs in CDH or other populations. We also completed another evaluation in a CDH sample using a more modern multi-sensor device, the Fitbit Alta HR. Now, this table reflects the important meat and potatoes or quinoa and berries, whatever be your preference, from this investigation. Yet, this is certainly overwhelming for a presentation and would take a lot of time to orient and unpack. So I'll just synthesize by saying that we observed noticeable improvements in the ability of the more modern multi-sensor device to accurately quantify and classify sleep relative to the results that we observed with the Jawbone Up 3. And importantly, performance was largely comparable across subgroups within our sample that was undergoing assessment for CDH. I want to close down this presentation on an optimistic note, drawing attention to the potential promise that is seemingly on the horizon for wearables as a tool to enhance clinical assessment, treatment, and access to care in central disorders of hypersomnolence and sleep medicine broadly. I see great potential for these devices to provide real-time personalized nudges, if you will, that correspond to medication reminders or personalized therapeutic recommendations. Additionally, these devices can ultimately be used to provide more precise, accessible phenotyping of physiological and psychological characteristics that can aid clinical decision-making and support treatment monitoring. And I get extremely excited about the potential of the emerging technology as a path to developing surrogates for heavily relied upon, resource-intensive, and inaccessible assessments, such as the MSLT, with this greatly increasing the accessibility and repeatability of assessments. Furthermore, it affords assessment in natural conditions, which seemingly may increase the validity of the behaviors being measured. Now, the performance abilities are not quite there to make this integration at this time, yet the capabilities are improving rapidly, and this is merely to show a direct example of how emerging technology has the potential to greatly transform our approach to assessment, seemingly for the better. And ultimately, it is my belief that we are on the frontier of a major shift in the approach to clinical data collection, provider and client interaction, and treatment monitoring. This shift appears to be happening across healthcare domains, with sleep potentially being an area most readily available to embrace this transition. Although I have much more that I'd like to say on this topic, I'm going to land the presentation here as I want to afford the opportunity for quality discussion. And before that, I'd like to again thank the Hypersomnia Foundation and Matt for the invitation to speak on this topic, as well as Dr. Plant for his support and mentoring over the years. So with that, I thank you all for your patience and attention.
All right. Thank you so much, Jesse. I just want to, yeah. So as you guys are thinking about questions, please think asking questions broadly versus how, will my watch measure my own sleep? So because Jesse unfortunately won't be able to go through kind of that detailed breakdown. So if you have any questions, please feel free to share. Jesse, you did a great job of taking a very complicated subject matter and really kind of getting down into the basics. Let's see. We do have one question to kick off here from David. Is there a better type of wearable that provides more reliable data, ring or watch? I find wearing tight watches uncomfortable, but wearing it less tightly probably reduces the accuracy. So I think there's probably a couple of questions there too. Like, is there a more user-friendly device when it comes to wearing? And do you have preferences, in terms of watch versus ring, broadly speaking?
Yeah, good questions there, David. And I think the first one I'll kind of tackle if I can is kind of the fit of the device, wearing the watch. And I don't think it's well studied as far as how the actual kind of tightness affects measurement accuracy. I can tell from my own anecdotes, just from my experience as a runner and kind of looking at my heart rate metrics and things like that, when it's a little bit looser versus not. I suspect, as you pointed out, that accuracy is probably reduced when it comes to having a little looser fit. And these are kind of the nuances that exist as kind of major challenges of figuring out how to best implement them and kind of give guidance on people to use them. When it comes to like, is one kind of modality or format of collection going to be more reliable than another? thinking about a ring versus a watch, I would argue that we don't know. I know that that's not a great answer, but I think within that, to your point, is which is the one that's most comfortable for you and you're more likely to wear more often, because that's going to be more reliable, right? And so I think that's points to a need to have many different options available if we are going to bring these kind of clinically, so that we can have variations to fit people's needs.
Yeah, I love that answer. I think, one of the old questions that I would get with exercise is what's the best exercise? It's the one that you're willing to do. And so in terms of a device, what's the best device? Which are you willing to wear? What's the most comfortable? So, before we get into another question too, I just wanted to acknowledge too, there's a lot of challenges when it comes to analyzing these devices on how we can look at like maybe how they rank next to the PSG or the MSLT, but we don't know necessarily how each device gets to the answer. So it can be a little nuanced. And I know Jesse and I've had some conversations about that too, kind of sidebar as well. I wanted to ask, kind of put on my question hat here. Do you think that we're moving towards a better place, maybe taking a step back and looking broadly, like with sleep apnea, where some of the pulse oximeters that are available on devices are getting more accurate? I know there's been some questions too in terms of racial disparities, in terms of skin tone impacting measurement in those devices. So kind of broad 100 feet view, what are your thoughts there with the advancement in pulse ox on wearables?
Yeah, I think that advancement, that evolution is actually a kind of a nice kind of lens into how these things can be best applied the soonest, in the sense that, from my understanding of kind of the recent integrations and evolutions and FDA clearances, some devices now exist to provide kind of a passive monitoring approach that can nudge people towards receiving certain care or further kind of follow-up assessment with more precise, heavily relied upon home sleep apnea tests or kind of in-lab assessments. And so I think that to me is like the most warming aspect of where this technology can go, is when harnessed appropriately to give people who may not be seeking out care perhaps some insight that there might be a need. And then if we can further extend that bridge to actually provide them with connections to actually have that care, that would be a step further. Because I don't know that that's happening yet in kind of the pulse ox sleep apnea domain. But that's kind of where I see it as a potential huge benefit at this point, is kind of taking the onus off of one having to go to their provider and kind of begin this long process to eventually potentially get evaluated. Perhaps we can passively collect information that may get a profile that can help steer people to the care they need, not just in sleep, but beyond that. I can't really speak too much about kind of the accuracy of pulse ox, to be honest. It's not really my expertise. I do know that one of our good friends, Matt, Kathy Goldstein, she's really an expertise in this area on that matter. And I know that she has some differential views on the hardware being used, and perhaps they're evolving, but the accuracy may not be exactly what we want at this time. But again, not necessarily my specialty. And one of the things that we talk about a lot in this space is reasonable error. And like, I think error is okay as long as it's reliable error, right? And I think that's something we don't really know yet, is if it's going to be inaccurate, that's okay as long as it's consistently inaccurate and we can have stability with that. So these are just kind of the complexities and kind of nuances of how do we figure these things out to really unlock their potential.
Yeah. You kind of stole some of my good questions that I had coming up, but no, always appreciate your thoroughness and your answers. I think this is a great broad question too. Someone's considering possibly updating to a newer device. You mentioned kind of the exponential growth that we see, with some of these devices. Is there a point where you would say something might be a little bit more obsolete, or what would you be looking at, just kind of reframing it personally, to look at purchasing coming up? Is there anything that catches your eye, or is it just perhaps upgrade periodically?
I think it's a great question, and one that I struggle with myself as a user of these devices, right? Is when to upgrade, if to upgrade, is it an upgrade? Do I change between brands? All those different things, because clearly in some ways companies are motivated to get you to continually buy the newest product, and it may not have any benefit, right?
Mhm.
And so when discussing that decision in the first place of should I even buy a watch or a ring or a device that collects my sleep, I think the question that is anchored to that is, what am I going to use it for? And starting with that question, right? Am I using it for sleep? Well, there are some devices out there that seemingly are more motivated in emphasizing that domain, and I may want to hitch my wagon to those companies. I'm going to be very careful not to like praise or defame one company or another in this conversation as best I can. And yet, if you're more interested in, say, like fitness monitoring or the ability to use it while you're swimming or whatever it may be, other devices may have better applicability for that at the trade-off of some other feature. And I do think it takes a little bit of like investigation to kind of understand these characteristics between devices well. But I think the information's out there to help people have informed decisions on this front. And I think that's still in the same camp of when should I upgrade or if I should upgrade. Has a new model provided me seemingly a new feature that is something I'm actually missing currently? And can I actually like validly determine from the available information out there that it actually is an upgrade? If not, I'd probably encourage you not to. If you like what you have and it provides you some sort of happiness and stability, then stay with what you have. As far as devices that exist that may be a little bit more obsolete at this time, it really is uncommon that a device is strictly using accelerometry. Even our traditional actigraphs now, which I hate this Venn diagram of blurred nomenclature, if you will. Traditional actigraphs, if we want to view those as just accelerometers, some of these companies are starting to put PPG sensors on them. So they have technically the same hardware as the consumer grade devices. So where's the kind of boundary actually exist? It's very, very blurred. But I would say that anything that's solely reliant upon accelerometry these days is probably missing something and is going to give you less kind of accurate estimates than the other stuff that's available.
Appreciate that. I love this question here. Megan gives you some nice positive affirmation and thanks. But I love this question. Out of curiosity, to what extent were you able to partner with Jawbone and Fitbit when you were evaluating the performance of devices in CDH populations? And what would you hope to see in terms of collaboration between researchers, patients, consumers, industry, especially in terms of the issue with black box, being unable to see what's going on? What would, as a researcher, you look for in terms of like cracking that nut, figuring out what that puzzle looks like?
Yeah, beautiful questions. You have your finger on kind of the really important stuff that we're navigating right now. And so to tackle that first one, doing those studies, we had no partnership. Honestly, our first journey into this wearable sleep tracking space, Dr. Plank came into my office one day and dropped a Fitbit Flex, one of the oldest models of the Fitbit, on my desk and was like, "Do you know what this is?" And I was like, "I think it's a fitness activity tracker." He's like, "I think it tracks sleep." And I was like, "Cool." And so we just started slapping on people with an Actigraph in lab and started to do these evaluations. And then so we ended up just continuing to buy our own products. And I think one of the main challenges with those data is to create like staging, like a hypnogram, if you will. We actually had to go in and kind of look at the outputs and kind of track from like this period of time to that period of time, it's 10 minutes. And then I would create an Excel file that like had that mapped out. And there are some kind of third-party groups for Fitbit, something called Fitabase, that you can pay to get that data. But clearly that's a barrier that a lot of researchers don't really want to go down. And I kind of have mixed feelings about that existing in the first place. And I think that's an important point, that some of these devices, their data is actually more accessible than others, which makes kind of a decision for researchers at time and those who want to integrate clinically as well. For instance, like it's actually much easier to get data from an Apple device using APIs to get like the raw data and the stuff that we want to build algorithms with. Yet that device has like a day of battery life. So it may not be practical for like what I really want to study and use it for, right? And so this is kind of the trade-offs between these devices that are a major complexity at this point. And as far as what I hope, I mean, oof, how much time do you have? No, I really am. I'm optimistic. From some general conversations, I think it's going to require kind of give and take from both sides. I think honoring the fact that industry groups understandably don't want to reveal their proprietary algorithms, we have to find a way to come to terms with. That is the nature of the commercial domain, and that is what they're selling for the most part, right? Now, I do think an industry group can capitalize on this vulnerability right now and make great headway into the clinical integration, but that remains to be seen. So we need to find a way to, I think, find partnerships where we can create like a database of sorts that allows people to take their devices and have it analyzed under different algorithms that companies release. So that if a sleep center per se wants to analyze this device under this algorithm, kind of keep these data stable, we can have that sort of partnership. Again, we don't need to know that algorithm. We just need to have access to all the algorithms you have or the versions so that we can find a way to create stability and comparability between the tools over different generations. I really do. I wish there was better transparency, but again, I think it's not even a resignation. I think it's an acceptance, and I think it's okay. Just kind of understanding where they're coming from and their needs as well. So I hope that answered your question, Megan.
Yeah, and I want to point out that I have heard of a number of these companies are actually collaborating with sleep physicians and other researchers as well when designing some. I know a now defunct Amazon Halo device was, a mutual acquaintance of ours, Jesse, who helped with kind of designing some of the foundation for that. And, one of your close friends also, has a relationship with, another device company as well. So that I think is a positive step that you're seeing the integration there, and I think that pivots to the one question that Michael asked here. When you look at a lot of the major platforms have their own health assessment tools, and you've seen the Apple Watch that started to add a sleep apnea detection over 30 days. Are you optimistic or hopeful that you could see that extended into IH or narcolepsy? You mentioned that battery life thing, and having done some work with you related to this, having to recharge your battery twice a day to get the right data, the rich data, was a bit of a limiting factor. But I hope that we're continuing to evolve. But do you think we're at a place where we could start looking at some of these tools, looking at some of these conditions, or are we still a little bit of ways away from that?
Honestly, I think we're there, and I think Michael, this is the utility of these devices currently, and how we could most readily kind of deploy them. Your comment about just delivering questionnaire data and creating some sort of profile that way. Some questionnaires are behind a paywall, which kind of sucks. And yet we can still find a way to get kind of a comprehensive kind of view of things and things like that in certain aspects. Matt, from our experience together, it actually came together very nicely. I won't reveal everything that happened, but I think we were able to actually phenotype people reasonably well from wearable data and responses to subjective symptoms and questionnaires that would be really helpful for a provider if they got this kind of profiling sheet. And I do think it would really reduce the diagnostic burden and challenges that a lot of clinicians face. And in turn, that would lead to kind of enhanced diagnostic accuracy and a kind of removing or at least addressing some of this delay in diagnosis that we often see in the CDH community. And so I think these things are really, really attractive for that feature. And I'm really hopeful that groups get excited about this and try and go down that avenue, as I think it would be very fruitful for the patients, honestly.
Yeah, so we're coming up on our hour with Jesse. If there's any last second questions, feel free to put them in there. I wanted to ask you one question, Jesse, about the concept of like orthosomnia, which is, and correct me if I'm wrong when I'm describing this, but a preoccupation with sleep data actually driving anxiety and keeping people from, getting their best night's sleep. Just wanted to hear your thoughts, just, from a mental health professional. Is that a concern that you see budding up? I know with insomnia, it can definitely be an issue. I know that I've certainly looked at data more than I should, or overweighed, versus thinking, how do I feel? But would love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a conversation that has to be had when we're having this bigger discussion. Any sort of kind of device output that we're giving to people, even if it's tracking sleep through sleep diaries or um, any form. I mean, Actigraphy is nice because it doesn't give that real-time feedback to a user and kind of blinds people from results that could bias their sleep or put more pressure on them to achieve certain outcomes, which is kind of what you're referencing. But any sort of tracking can create kind of a deleterious effect for some on their actual sleep. And so it's a very real phenomena. And I think certainly as these devices get more readily distributed across the general population, and at the same time, as sleep health remains and continues to be championed at the forefront of a kind of our public health discussions, which is a wonderful thing, and people become more attentive to their sleep, there can be kind of a hazardous intersection between all of this, where people become so fixated on having perfect sleep and trying to gamify their sleep. And the reality is, if someone tells me they have perfect sleep, I don't take that for a grain of salt, to be honest, because I don't think perfect sleep exists. And I can tell you that perfect sleep is not healthy sleep. So I think it's really important to just kind of have a campaign in some ways that helps people understand that these devices are a tool in certain capacities, and we need to do better at screening on who might be kind of harmed from these devices. And I think companies can do a better job of kind of owning that up front, that these devices may not be for everybody. And perhaps if there is, I know some groups, Jesse Deach over at Oregon State, who are working on kind of an orthosomnia screener. And I think something like this could be very helpful, some sort of quick screener that potentially can identify characteristics that maybe subjected or suggest that they would be more harmed than helped by tracking. I don't know if you could hear, but my cat feels like he's harmed from not eating at this point. But I think that's a really important avenue that we need to better understand. You know, it's a really, I think, complicated topic, as I can't give you an estimate of like the prevalence of orthosomnia in the general population. I just know it exists. And I think as we draw more attention to the importance of sleep health and give people more opportunities to monitor their sleep without managing this or monitoring that itself, we're setting people up for failure in some ways.
Yeah, great kind of closing thoughts there too. So anybody have anything else that they would like to ask Jesse? John, his cat, has already started to make protest. He's been a gentleman and a scholar for sharing his evening with us. So any other questions that kind of rapid fire at Jesse before he leaves for the evening? No. All right. Well, I will get a little bit mushy here as we kind of transition as Jesse leaves. We will have a one open session where we continue to have the conversations kind of independently. We can answer some of these questions about some devices that you may have after Jesse has left. But again, I love you like a brother. It means a lot for you to come here and share this wisdom with us. This is such high quality data. And you know, again, I think this is kind of a first conversation, and there just hasn't been a lot in this space, and you're a trailblazer so much in terms of both hypersomnolence, but also actigraphy. So just blessed to have you here, bud. Thanks, man. And just scritch John for me and tell him I'm sorry about the food.
Thank you, Jesse. That was so helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Everyone take care of yourself, and also go listen to that ACT discussion. It was really cool listening to Alyssa's benefit and self-compassion and self-love. Wonderful stuff. So keep up the great work.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,
All right.
bud.
Take care.
So now that Jesse's gone, we can say good things about him. He actually runs, I meant to say this too, he runs the Sleep Research Society's podcast. So he actually does a lot of the interviews. So if you guys are science nerds and appreciate the high level, not just hypersomnolence disorders, but all things sleep, Jesse does a great job of navigating those conversations. I did just want to open up the conversation. We've got 30 minutes here. I'm happy to explore some of it. I am nowhere near an expert on these, but I have spent a lot of time with Jesse as in a consultant capacity with a company that kind of worked on a hypersomnolence specific program software for hypersomnolence disorders. So I feel comfortable answering some of the questions, but you know, again, do you just kind of kickstart the conversation? Do you guys currently use a wearable device? And, you know, is it something that you're interested in, or is it something you're kind of interested in picking up? And we'll just kind of start the conversation from there. Shelly?
Yeah, so I don't anymore. I used a Fitbit for years and it broke. I don't remember why. I don't know if the band broke or if it actually broke. But there was a problem and I chose not to buy another one. I do think it's really awesome, but some of the things that he mentioned, like it doesn't track naps. If the nap is less than 1 hour, Fitbit wouldn't pick up on it. And it also, it thought I was sleeping on a regular basis in the evening when I was, laying on the couch watching TV and tired because it's late and I have a sleep disorder. So I think because of that, if I like every morning, if I would like go look at my data and like edit it, like, okay, no, I did not fall asleep at 8:30. Let me fix that. Okay, well, I woke up here. I felt like it was fairly accurate, but I did have to do that. So yeah, I don't use it anymore, but I would love to. I mean, I got really good data from it when I was using it and paying attention to it more. Another issue that I found, some, medications that we take can increase heart rate. And there was one night that my Fitbit thought I was awake all night. And it was just that I had, a higher heart rate and it thought I was doing stuff. But yeah, I mean, as they get better, I absolutely would love to, try another one because I thought it was really awesome.
Yeah, you mentioned something there that's really important. The amount of ways that it measures sleep is important. If it's solely based on movement, I've got periodic limb movement disorder, and like that in and of itself, flopping around can indicate that I'm not asleep when, even though it's disrupted, I'm still asleep. And then heart rate variability that you pointed out is a big one. And then, we are progressing with the pulse ox or the O2 saturation in your blood that also gives kind of a third picture for that. So, finding the right device is important. And some of these software companies are able to, if you download that app, you can actually look at that granular level. It can pick you up, you can like almost hone it in to do nap detection. The problem there is you basically bricked your device and its only job, it's almost just like a doctor's office actigraphy device at that point. It'll tell the time. You can't answer phone calls with it. Everything else is specific to that. We're getting there, but and I think that's what Jesse was answering to Michael's question. We're making huge strides, and I think we're close. We just have to hone it up a bit. Cheryl, you got your hand up?
Yeah, so I went and about, oh gosh, maybe 3 or so years ago, I decided that I wanted to start monitoring my sleep. And I kept talking with the doctors and all, and they're like, they don't believe in any of that stuff. So I just decided I was going to go into the Apple store. I've been using, an iPhone for years and years and years. And so I wanted to get an Apple Watch. And so at the time it was the Apple Watch 6. I still have it. I do need to upgrade it because it doesn't hold a charge. I mean, it holds the charge, but when you pull it up, it's down to like, I don't know, 76% to 79%. So it's at that point, kind of like when you have to I just replaced my phone too. So now I got to figure out, I don't want to get the most expensive ones. That's always kind of trying to figure out which one will work better. But when I was getting it, the thing that I did was I looked around to see what type of sleep app would work best for somebody with IH, because of the fact that I fall asleep during the day and at night, and I didn't want one that only worked at nighttime. And at that time, most of the sleep apps, even the ones that were built into the phone and the watch, were mostly for nighttime. And, like Shelley was saying, it works more on that longer period of time. And so I found the Pillow app. And so I put that on, and it will actually work within like 15-minute intervals. And it will let me know, like sometimes it'll say, oh, you fell asleep within 4 minutes. It can literally pick that up. It notices when I wake up, like at nighttime, it'll notice if I wake up, like if the cat bothers me and I immediately fall right back to sleep, it won't pick up on that because I'm really not even moving and I do fall right back to sleep. But if I wake up to go to the bathroom and then come back, it may show like 10 minutes that I was awake, and then it will show that I was asleep again. I know I was trying to do some research, and I know there's a bunch more that are out there. I have to do a little bit more research now, called Sleep Watch and Pillow and Circadia Track, because everything is off with me, Sleep Central and a few others. But I do have to try to figure out, since I need to get another one. I did get a free Fitbit that was supposed to track my sleep through that All of Us. I don't know if any of you do All of Us. They sent me one, but I never got it working, and it would have meant that I would have had one on one wrist and one on the other one, and I figured the heck with it. But I do sometimes check to see from the internal sleep app that comes with the watch, or with the watch, and then the one that I use. They're not always exact, but most of them start and end at the same time, and it's only where they're monitoring, the whether it's the REM or the light and the deep sleep. That's usually the only spots that are really off, but usually my actual sleep time is fairly close. So I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't know if anybody here had any ideas. Like, I don't really want to buy the most expensive newest watch, but if anybody has had like maybe the step down, I think they said, was it the Apple SE, that you don't need, that doesn't need to have its own plan. I don't know if anybody here has been using any of those with any of the sleep apps. If anyone can give me recommendations, because I do need to get one. And I was hoping in this, since we're talking about it tonight, if anyone has any thoughts on that, I'm open. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great, if you want to ask or make a recommendation, feel free to put that in the chat. One thing that Jesse mentioned too is when you break down into that hypnogram or looking at what stage sleep you are, that's when it's kind of becoming Wild West territory, because they don't know what algorithm or what measurements they're using to determine where you are. And that's when you start to see some of that variability, and you start to, lose some of it. If you're looking at like time to sleep, time to rise, that can be a little bit easier to make reliable. But some of the differences, you can see some huge differences in terms of what one brand might say as you're in your different stages of sleep. Sometimes they don't get quite as granular, and it's like deep light REM versus N1, N2, N3 REM sleep that that you see on a in lab test.
But
you know,
it
and
is,
again,
but it is true that I have noticed it shows me the REM when I'm sleeping the nighttime hours, and when I do sleep during the day, it doesn't show the REM, which
Yeah.
my understanding, that is true IH. If you do naps, you typically don't get into REM, and in your deeper sleep at night, you can. And so I am seeing that differentiation even on the watch. So I guess it's doing something correctly. So
no, again, I think that's making the assumption that it is reading both correct, and that's kind of the challenge. Again, if it's reliable, it's giving you good, reliable information, or consistent information, even if it is inaccurate. So you know that your type of sleep that you're in that is consistent across your naps.
I'd be happy with 80%, and that's
Yeah,
good enough for me. So if anyone has recommendations, just throw them in the chat and I'll take a look at them. So
yeah.
thank you.
And one of the challenges with doctors' offices taking those is that's not a billable. I mean, they can bill that, but it's not often reimbursed by insurance companies. So if we can, if we could ever get to a shift where physicians and Dr. Ortiz and I have had this conversation, he would love to, he does try to bill it in certain cases to get it across the finish line. He can get reimbursed for tracking some of that data. That would open up a whole new world, because if doctors can bill insurance companies for it, you better believe that they would start really pushing that and looking at that data, fairly intensely. But I've found that my physician likes the data, but is more interested in just seeing over time versus that granular night to night issue, because that's, again, not too much. And one conversations I've had with Jesse is, when you wake up in the morning, how do you feel is more important than how the watch tells you you slept. And that's something that, I think is an important qualifier, because it may say you've got, horrible sleep or a low sleep score. Those are all numbers that it makes up. How are you feeling? And then, that may be, obviously we never wake up and feel great, but compared to your baseline, it was a different. Let's see here. I love that suggestion there. I get refurbs and scratch and dent when I can. I did want to add something too. I was looking it up. The O2 sensor from Apple Watches were pulled at the first part of the year. I don't. They may be a little gun shy moving forward with them until they can make sure that it's accurate. But I do think there's a place in this space for that. And there are other devices that have the O2 sensor. But I know I mentioned that earlier, and I just wanted to clarify that as of right now, you can get one of the older versions or the older models that hasn't, but the newer models that has been taken off just due to some accuracy things. But I think that's going to change, especially when it comes to sleep apnea. It can be a great indicator of whether or not someone is having an event, or the frequency of those events. Claire, I'd be interested from you as a parent. Have you seen, is this something that you use with Matilda, or have you heard other parents talking about it in terms of tracking? Because that's something that, I do wonder about too.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I do have an Apple Watch, and I put in the chat there that I've been using Auto Sleep as an app for probably about 2 years, which I think is pretty reliable in that it measures deep sleep and more shallow, and then it gives you all these readings in the morning. And it was funny what you were just saying there, because sometimes I feel like I've had an awful night, and it will say day's readiness, superb. And I'm like, no, I feel terrible. A few nights ago, I did put it on Matilda, actually. It's a good question. So I wanted to see, because if we'd had more time with Jessie, I think one tool with all these wearables might be when we're changing medication. And she's going through changes. So I did put the watch on her to get a baseline, and she's on an oxybate therapy overnight. So that was really interesting to see how much sleep she got on 2 doses, and it came just shy of 6 hours, which for an 18-year-old's not great, is it? But she doesn't have IH, just for the purpose of this meeting. She has narcolepsy type 1. So I think it is something I'm going to continue with, especially when she's going through more medication changes. Is it the best app out there? I don't know. I've tried Fitbit, and I think it just gets to a price point where you've just got to stick with what you've got before you can keep a new thing. So I'm kind of more in favor of the apps, really, because I think it's not device reliant, is what I would say. Yeah. If your question is, does she as a young adult bother? No, she doesn't. She doesn't.
Yeah. That's consistent with my kids too, who are approximately the same age. They like to be able to answer their phone from their watch, and to perhaps look at steps if they're competing, but not a lot of utility there.
Yeah, but I do think it's quite interesting. I mean, sometimes I think it can set up a bit of fear in you, like, oh, I had terrible night's sleep, and I've been having terrible night's sleep for 10, 15, 20 years. I'm going to get dementia. And I sort of go into a bit of a bad headspace sometimes. But I also want some of my other family members to wear it, but they have an intolerance to anything on their skin at night. And if I'd have had more time with Jessie, I would have explored that. People that can't tolerate it. And we didn't talk about the dream headband either, which is another conversation. Someone's got their hand up, Shelley.
Yeah. Go ahead, Shelley.
Well, I just wanted to kind of respond to what you said, Claire, as far as like the readiness score, because when I was using my Fitbit, same thing. I would check my readiness score, and it was like from 0 to 100. And even when I felt horrible. It was like 80% or 85 or whatever. And I was like, I do not feel 80% ready for this day. Like that is, I do not. So it's funny that you also have that experience. But it did when I started a new medication, I checked it one morning and my readiness score was like 1. And I was like, what did I do? Like when I feel bad, it's 80. Like, what did I do? And it was related to my heart rate. The medication increased my heart rate. So when I looked at my readiness score, I was like, what I do? And it was like, you worked out a ton yesterday. You should rest today. And I was like, I did not work out a ton yesterday. That is not accurate. So when I looked in it, my heart rate was elevated. So yeah, that it at least helped me realize that one of the medications was impacting my heart rate.
I think bringing up the medication piece and using these, whether they're apps or devices, as tools, it is in some ways still in its infancy, but tech's moving really quickly. And I think this is the kind of feedback we should give as individuals and as a community, that what do we need it for, right? What do we need it for?
Well,
and
to
Matt, about I didn't do this at the time, but a lot of parents do with kids with sleep disorders. I'm talking about, measure because of like the impact of puberty on an early puberty and all those. So there's so many variables, but of course it's always about compliance for kids, whether we're talking about sleep devices or chores or anything. So
yeah. Claire, you had mentioned the Dream Headband. I think it goes by the name. There's one called Muse as well. And they're getting better at doing actual brainwave sleep. And there are ones that you can purchase as a consumer. Again, it's fairly expensive. It's like a $400 device that, may or may not provide a whole lot of insight. And, Shelley, when you're talking about that readiness score, that's based on like a 24-hour view of yourself, not just looking at the sleep. And so, what we do know about IH is that you have high sleep efficiency, too high, but for some people. So you're in bed, you sleep a lot. That would skew your results potentially in the you got good sleep category when you still may wake up and feel wretched. And it's interesting, Claire. I loved what you said there about using, like, it has its place, it has utility. If you see, and it's consistent, even if it's not necessarily, answering everything you want. But if you try new med, you see a huge shift in something, as both of you said, that may indicate that it's either working well or perhaps that there's a disruption to be monitored. But I think at this point, we're still confused as to what it could mean.
Yeah. And I think sort of for feedback, it does remind you that, because let's think about sleep health for a minute, where we really need consistent bedtime as well. And we can all be erratic with that. But this one particular app, and I think some of the devices do remind you, like, well, you were 20% late on your bedtime. So I think there's some merit in the feedback, but I always end up feeling like a bit of a failure, It's so bad. Another thing to feel bad about, I didn't go to bed on time. So slave, not master, really, and that's what we want to use it for. And yeah, interesting.
Well, and one thing that I think Jesse alluded to a little bit, and I think it will be a great utility for these devices, is using it for diagnostic purposes, screening at one point. But we talked about how unreliable or the ability to replicate, an MSLT with IH is. It's like less than 50%. But if you're able to view, a 24-hour landscape of your sleep following, maybe 2 weeks at home, that very well could be how we're looking at future diagnosis of IH. That has to go through a whole lot of levels of clearance, but there's different European standards that they look at, when they're testing for these conditions, because the MSLT is woeful when it comes to replicating the same results in people with IH and NT2. So I'm hopeful that we can start to see some strides there, in terms of diagnosis, People with NT1, it's a challenge too if you have to get off of an SSRI. That may be a limitation. So if you can track for a couple weeks more than just your sleep diary, it could be really valuable. And then also screening, that could send you a recommendation, be like, hey, you've been flagged. You may want to talk to a doctor about, some potential sleep challenges that you're experiencing. But anything to help raise awareness and decrease time to diagnosis, I think is a huge step. And, Claire, I liked your idea of organizing some advocacy org's position on these devices. What does the community need?
Yeah. I mean, at the back end, you get a little bit worried, don't you? Like Fitbit or Apple Watch, they're all collecting data, and none of us say, what the hell are you doing with that? Like, do we really read that entire, agreement at the beginning? So that concerns me a little bit as well. But I think if we actually had a different approach to it, like what do we want from it rather than what are we giving potentially? What are we giving away with a bit of information coming back? I don't know, sort of where my head goes. What do we want from it? Well, we need accuracy for a start, because actually what's worse than having no information is inaccurate information, I think. So that could be even more damaging. But I think it's definitely going in the right direction, and there's a lot of value to it. You just got to sort of play around and find the one that works for you. And of course, I guess with the holiday season coming up, people whether to buy any of these things, I don't know.
Yeah. Kind of aptly timed in terms of tech. I know I just saw too, Dr. Chris Winter just did an interesting Sleep Unplugged podcast that dealt with if you're looking at a sleep technology Christmas purchase or holiday purchase rather, it may be worthwhile to check out, because he's, he looks like a goober because he's like wearing like sleep glasses and an eye mask and all this stuff at the same time. But there is so much commercialization and what's valid, why should I buy this, and he kind of goes over that from a medical standpoint, so maybe a worthwhile watch as well.
Not to forget the basics and the obvious things. It's not for nothing, but it makes a huge difference if you sleep in a dark room and you don't have noise pollution. Right, you do have consistent bedtimes, and I think we shouldn't sort of take our mind off those pieces that actually are really great tools that sometimes we get so into the tech. So, even when we talk about tech, I bought Matilda the glasses, the blue glass, the light glasses, wears them anything, but these are the things that keep us awake and are so disruptive. So always take sort of tech with a bit of pinch of salt, really, but certainly something wearable hopefully isn't shining the wrong kind of light in our eyes when we need to be asleep.
Matt, what did you say? Dr. Winter said important things somewhere.
Oh, Chris went on Sleep Unplugged podcast that just came out. It talks about different things that are available the holiday season, and I don't think he's endorsing anything. He's just telling you what are some things, maybe perhaps what to avoid. Because I'm gonna be honest, I could look at like all of those things and be like, I don't know. I know, as Claire said, blackout curtains or something that I want. They've got some sleep things, sleep loops that you can put in to block out sound. That the sound aspect's helpful for me because of the hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations. If my ears are plugged and I'm still hearing someone talk, that's a good sign that my body is making that up and it's not, or my mind is, and it's not real. So I've used that as a screening tool for hallucinations as well. But yeah, so we've got about 7 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions? Specifically, I put a couple of links in the chat that were more broadly for some of the headbands that are available. These were companies that were at the AASM conference or the APSS, the sleep conference, that Dream headband that actually measures brain waves. And then Muse, I know you can buy, out just in a commercial setting. It's not just used for research, hospital purposes.
I mentioned, I put it in the chat earlier, but I know there are like pads or trackers or something you can put on your bed or under your mattress. I don't remember a lot about them as far as what all they track, and obviously would only be able to track, you know, when you're actually in bed and movement. But yeah, I know those are another option for people looking for different types of trackers.
Yeah, thank you for putting that. It's great for kids who are perhaps on the spectrum, who wearing a watch might be somewhat unrealistic. You know, you can still get, you know, autism and sleep is a huge research focused area, but it's tough to track somebody when they don't want to wear a watch, they don't want to wear a headband. So some of these tools were developed as a way to help track for those populations. But again, I think pediatrics too. And again, there was it's now defunct. There was an Amazon Halo device that would actually measure movement in the room, and that was how it measured. So you didn't actually have to have a physical wearable, but it would measure movement and sound as it listened to your breath. So there's other alternatives out there. You know, so if a watch, if a ring isn't necessarily your cup of tea, you may be able to find something that suits your needs. I, for one, want an Oura ring, but I don't want to pull the trigger on that price tag. And I couldn't wear it when I was lifting, and I like to lift. So
Can I ask you a stupid question that kind of jumps onto that one? I
Yeah.
can't afford something like that, so I always take my phone and I place it like near me and have my watch on. Aren't we supposed to like not have any like electrical equipment near us when we're sleeping? I mean, are we kind of like doing the opposite of what we're supposed to be doing in order to get a good night's sleep?
I mean, that's a good point. I think people's sensitivity to electrical currents varies dramatically. I know looking at a device right before bed or looking at anything stimulating is against best sleep health practices. But it's also easy for me to reach over and grab. But that alarm is so important for me. But I will try to put my phone well past arm's reach. Because it's easy when I wake up to like look at it. And then again, you get hooked. There's some notification that's like the most important thing in the entire world in that moment. It's not important at all. It's just like an Instagram post that Claire's put up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I should check it. So, you know, again, put them away if it best.